"You're nothing but a wallet to me. I've never loved you." The words still echo in my mind, spoken by my own daughter on Father's Day, with the house full of guests who just lowered their heads and let the poison flow. That day I made a decision that would change everything. I closed my wallet forever. What my daughter didn't know was that I had kept a letter from my late wife for 25 years, a letter that predicted exactly what would happen. She also didn't know about the little deaf girl at St. Mary's Children's Home who called me Grandpa without even knowing my name. What started as the most painful betrayal of my life would lead to an unexpected redemption that no one saw coming, especially not my daughter when she discovered what I had done with her inheritance. If you've ever been used by someone you loved or wondered if second chances are possible after heartbreak, my story might just give you hope. Follow this channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I promise the ending of this journey will leave you in tears, but they might not be the kind you expect. I've been staring at this old oak table for what feels like hours now, running my weathered fingers over its scratches. Each mark tells a story, just like the wrinkles on my 73-year-old face. This table witnessed it all. The laughter, the celebrations, and that moment when my own flesh and blood shattered what was left of my heart. It was Father's Day, just 3 months ago. I remember how the morning light filtered through the curtains as I carefully wrapped the small gift I'd bought for myself. A tradition I'd started years ago when I realized no one else would bother. A simple coffee mug with "World's Best Dad" printed on it. Pathetic, I know, but hope dies hard. I dressed in my best shirt, the blue one Sarah, my late wife, had given me on our last anniversary together. 25 years she's been gone, and I still iron that shirt the way she taught me. Some habits you just can't break, even when there's no one left to notice. "You should call before coming over, Dad," Amanda said when I arrived at her suburban home, not even trying to hide the annoyance in her voice. My daughter, once my little princess who would run into my arms screaming, "Daddy," now a stranger who could barely look me in the eyes. I clutched the casserole dish I'd prepared. "I thought, it's Father's Day. I made your mother's famous sweet potato casserole." She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath as she walked away, leaving the door open. I followed like an unwanted stray dog, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. The house was full. Her husband Greg, their 2 teenage kids glued to their phones, and some neighbors I'd never met before. No one looked up when I entered. No Happy Father's Day, no hug, nothing. I placed my casserole among the store-bought dishes on the dining table. Someone had spilled wine on the tablecloth, the one I'd paid for last Christmas. I quietly dabbed at the stain with my handkerchief. "Dad, seriously? It's just a tablecloth," Amanda snapped. "Why don't you sit down and stop fussing?" I nodded and took my place at the far end of the table, where they'd squeezed in an extra chair, a plastic lawn chair that creaked under my weight. Everyone else sat in proper dining chairs. I pretended not to notice. Throughout dinner, I tried to join the conversation, sharing stories about when Amanda was little. Each time she'd cut me off with a sharp, "Dad, nobody wants to hear about ancient history." Her kids snickered. Her husband smirked behind his beer can. I fell silent and focused on my food, though I couldn't taste a thing. When dessert came around, I noticed no one had touched my casserole. It sat there, cold and untouched, just like my heart. "So, Dad," Amanda suddenly addressed me, her voice unnaturally loud. Everyone looked up. Greg and I were talking about the kids' college funds. "You know, Zach wants to go to NYU next year." Ah, now I understood why I'd been invited. I set my fork down slowly. "I see. It's going to be expensive," she continued, not even trying to be subtle. "And since you're just sitting on all that money—" "Amanda," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "I've already paid for their private school tuition for 12 years. And last month I covered your second mortgage." The table fell uncomfortably quiet. Her face flushed red, not with shame, but with anger. "Well, what else are you going to do with it?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Spend it on yourself? At your age? It's not like you need it." I looked around the table. Her husband was suddenly very interested in his napkin. My grandchildren wouldn't meet my gaze. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. My voice cracked. "I thought today was about spending time together, not about money." That's when it happened. That's when my daughter looked me straight in the eyes with the entire table watching and said in a voice cold as ice, "You're nothing but a wallet to me. You've never been anything else. I've never loved you." The nervous laughter that followed echoed like hammer blows to my soul. I froze with my fork midair, still eating the piece of pie I'd brought myself, knowing she wouldn't have prepared anything for me. No one defended me, not my son-in-law, not my grandchildren. They just lowered their heads and let the poison flow. I set my fork down with a steady hand that surprised even me. A lifetime of swallowing pain had taught me well. I carefully folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. "Dad, don't be so dramatic." Amanda rolled her eyes. "Sit down. We're still discussing the college fund." But I was already moving toward the door. No one followed me. No one called after me. I drove home with trembling hands but dry eyes. Deep down, I'd been expecting this. For years, my daughter had seen me as a useful nuisance. I paid for my grandchildren's school, renovated her house twice, sold my car to cover her husband's loan. But that day, that was the final period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. And that night, for the first time in 25 years, I opened the safe and took out the last letter my wife wrote before she died. A letter I never had the courage to give our daughter. A letter that at that moment found a new purpose. As I held Sarah's handwriting against my chest, I made a decision that would change everything. The wallet was closing forever, and with it, a chapter of my life that had brought nothing but pain. That night, after returning from Amanda's house, I sat in my recliner, the one Sarah and I picked out together 30 years ago. The leather was cracked now, worn thin in places where my body had settled night after night, year after year. The house around me was quiet, empty except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Sarah's parents, still keeping perfect time after all these decades. With trembling fingers, I unfolded Sarah's letter. Even after 25 years, the paper still carried a faint trace of her perfume, or perhaps that was just my imagination desperately clinging to memories. Her handwriting flowed across the page in elegant, deliberate strokes. Sarah had always taken pride in her penmanship, teaching it at the local elementary school for over 20 years. "My dearest Richard," the letter began. I traced each word with my fingertip, feeling the indentations her pen had made in the paper. These marks were the last physical connection I had to her touch. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. There are things I need to tell you about our daughter, things I've observed that you, in your endless optimism and love, might have missed." I paused, taking a deep breath. The weight of her words still pressed heavily on my chest, even after all these years. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the window pane like distant applause. "Amanda has always been willful, even as a small child. You remember how she would throw tantrums when she couldn't have her way? How she blamed everyone but herself when things went wrong? I've watched this pattern grow stronger as she's gotten older, and it worries me deeply." I closed my eyes, remembering Amanda at 5 years old, screaming on the supermarket floor because I wouldn't buy her a candy bar. At 12, blaming her teacher when she failed a test she hadn't studied for. At 16, wrecking the car and somehow making it my fault for pressuring her to get her license. What you've always seen as spirited independence, I've recognized as something darker. She has a hole inside her, Richard. One that nothing seems to fill. Not our love, not material things, not even her own children. She takes and takes, but it's never enough. My eyes stung as I continued reading. Sarah had always seen things more clearly than I did. While I made excuses for Amanda's behavior, Sarah had recognized the pattern forming. If one day she forgets who you are or treats you as if you never existed, remember what you promised me. That promise, made in Sarah's hospital room, as the cancer ate away at her body, leaving her voice a whisper and her once vibrant face hollow. I'd held her hand, terrified of a world without her in it, willing to say anything to ease her pain. "Promise me you'll be strong enough to set boundaries even with Amanda, especially with Amanda." Her fingers had clutched mine with surprising strength. "Don't let her drain you dry. You deserve to be loved, not just used." I'd nodded, tears streaming down my face, but I hadn't kept that promise. Not really. After Sarah died, Amanda became all I had left. I couldn't bear to lose her too, even as she grew more demanding, more entitled, more callous. I kept giving. Money, time, emotional energy, hoping that someday it would be enough. That someday she would see me as her father again, not just her personal ATM. My wife knew that our daughter carried anger toward the world from an early age. Ever since she couldn't hold her baby brother in her arms, the son we lost to SIDS when Amanda was just 7, she channeled that pain toward me and never let go. And yet, I refused to give up on her all these years. That night I read the letter aloud as if speaking to my departed wife. The sound of my voice, rough with age and emotion, echoed in the empty house. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I whispered to the silence. "I failed you. I let her walk all over me, just like you feared. And then I made a decision. I would donate everything, not to my daughter, but to someone who truly needed a father." What I hadn't mentioned yet is that 2 months ago, I met a child at a shelter in the city, an 8-year-old girl named Emery, who called me Grandpa without even knowing my name. That was when my old, aching heart began to beat for someone again. I walked to my desk and pulled out a legal pad. With determination I hadn't felt in years, I began writing, "Last Will and Testament of Richard J. Michaels." By morning my hand was cramped and my eyes were burning, but the document was complete. I would take it to my lawyer first thing Monday. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt a sense of purpose and, strangely, peace. As dawn broke, I carefully folded Sarah's letter and placed it back in the envelope. But instead of returning it to the safe, I put it in my jacket pocket. It was time to carry her wisdom with me, not lock it away in the dark. Outside my window, a cardinal, bright red against the gray morning, landed on the bird feeder. Sarah had always said cardinals were visitors from heaven. I watched it for a long moment, wondering if perhaps she was watching over me, nodding in approval at my belated courage. "Better late than never, right, love?" I whispered to the bird, to Sarah, to the universe. The cardinal tilted its head as if in agreement, before flying away into the morning sky. The following week passed in a blur of activity that seemed to breathe new life into my tired bones. After finalizing my will with Gerald, my attorney of 30 years, I found myself driving through the rougher part of town towards St. Mary's Children's Home. The building itself was nothing special, a converted elementary school with fading yellow paint and windows that had seen better days. But what happened inside those walls was nothing short of miraculous. I remember the first time I stumbled upon this place. It was raining, much like the night Sarah died. I'd been wandering aimlessly through the city, something I often did on the anniversary of her passing. Somehow I ended up sheltering under the awning of St. Mary's, soaked to the bone, and feeling every bit of my 73 years. That's when I saw her, little Emery, sitting cross-legged on the floor just inside the glass doors, working intently on what looked like a jigsaw puzzle. Her tongue poked out slightly from the corner of her mouth in concentration, her dark curly hair falling over her face. Something about the determined set of her small shoulders reminded me so much of Sarah that I couldn't look away. A woman approached her, gesturing with her hands in what I later learned was sign language. The little girl looked up, her face breaking into a smile that could have lit up the darkest night. Then she noticed me standing there, a dripping old man staring through the glass. Instead of being frightened, she waved enthusiastically as if I were a long-lost friend. "Grandpa," she mouthed, pointing at me with absolute certainty. The woman, Megan, I would soon learn, looked embarrassed and hurried to open the door. "I'm so sorry, sir. Emery sometimes, well, she lost her grandfather recently and I think she's still looking for him in every older gentleman she sees." I found myself stepping inside, drawn by some force I couldn't explain. "It's quite all right," I said, my voice rough from disuse. "I don't mind being someone's grandpa for a minute or two." That minute turned into an hour, then weekly visits, and now, a new purpose. Today marked my 5th visit. I pulled my sedan into the small parking lot, checking the back seat to make sure none of my packages had tipped over. Fresh apples from the farmer's market, 3 new picture books, a soft blue blanket I'd spotted in a department store window. Small things, really. Things that wouldn't change the world, but might make one little corner of it a bit brighter. As I gathered my offerings, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Amanda. Again. This would be the 3rd call today. I let it go to voicemail, just as I had with the others. Each message was the same. Thinly veiled requests for money disguised as family concerns. "Dad, Zach's car insurance is due. Dad, the water heater is making strange noises. Dad, Greg thinks we should look at investment properties and we need a down payment." Once, those calls would have sent me scrambling to my checkbook. Now they just made me tired. Megan met me at the door, her kind face lighting up with recognition. She was younger than Amanda by at least a decade, but there was a wisdom in her eyes that my daughter had never developed. "Mr. Michaels, Emery's been watching the clock all morning. She knew it was Grandpa Tuesday," she said with a warm laugh. I felt a flush of pleasure at this. Someone was actually looking forward to seeing me. Not my wallet, not my checkbook, just me. I brought a few things, I said, suddenly self-conscious about my small offerings. Megan's eyes softened. You know you don't have to bring gifts every time, right? Your presence is more than enough. I nodded, but we both knew I'd continue. Not because I was trying to buy affection. God knows I'd learned that lesson the hard way. But because there was something healing about giving without expectation of return. Is Emery doing okay? I asked, setting my packages on the reception desk. I've been reading about sign language, but I'm afraid these old hands aren't as nimble as they once were. Megan's expression changed slightly, a shadow passing over her features. She has good days and hard days, like all our kids. She was born deaf, as you know, and her parents... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say they weren't equipped to handle a child with special needs. She's been with us for almost 3 years now. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, anger at parents who could abandon their child, mixed with a shameful gratitude that their loss had somehow become my gain. Before I could respond, there was a pattering of small feet, and Emery burst into the room like a miniature hurricane. She spotted me and launched herself forward, wrapping her thin arms around my waist with surprising strength. I placed a gentle hand on her head, feeling the soft curls beneath my palm. She looked up at me, her dark eyes shining, and signed something I couldn't understand. Megan translated. She says you smell like cookies today. I laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. That would be the snickerdoodles in my car. I thought we might have a picnic in the courtyard if that's allowed. As Megan nodded her approval, my phone buzzed again. Amanda. This time with a text message. The electricity bill is overdue. I need $350 by tomorrow or they'll shut it off. Don't make the kids suffer because you're mad at me. Classic Amanda, using her children as emotional leverage. Once, it would have worked. Not anymore. I silenced the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Today wasn't about Amanda or her demands. Today was about snickerdoodles and picture books and the small hand trustingly held in mine. What my daughter didn't know, what I'd hidden from her all these years, was that there was still so much love left in my old heart. Love she had rejected, but that someone else welcomed with open arms. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the neighborhood in hues of amber and crimson, when I decided to leave the envelope in Amanda's mailbox. I remember standing there, the crisp October air biting at my cheeks, my hand trembling slightly as I slipped the unmarked white envelope through the slot. Inside was a copy of my new will, naming St. Mary's Children's Home, and not Amanda, as my universal heir. It wasn't spite that drove me to this decision, though perhaps there was a small, wounded part of me that wanted her to feel something, anything, about losing me beyond the inconvenience of finding a new source of income. No, it was more the quiet certainty that I'd finally found a place where my legacy could do genuine good, where what I'd built over a lifetime of hard work wouldn't be squandered on luxury cars and vacation homes, but would instead give children like Emery a fighting chance. I drove away from Amanda's house that day without looking back, the knot in my stomach loosening with each mile. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. 12 days passed without a word from my daughter. No angry phone calls, no guilt-laden text messages, no demands disguised as familial obligation. Just silence. A silence so profound it was almost peaceful. I spent those 12 days visiting Emery, learning rudimentary sign language from a book Megan had given me, and sleeping better than I had since Sarah died. On the 13th day, everything shattered. I was in my garden, pruning the rose bushes Sarah had planted so many years ago, when I heard the screech of tires in my driveway. Even before I turned around, I knew it was Amanda. Only she could make even the act of parking a car sound angry. The car door slammed with enough force to shake the nearby rhododendron. I straightened up slowly, my old back protesting the movement, and turned to face whatever storm was coming. Amanda burst through the garden gate like a fury, her face contorted with rage. Greg followed close behind, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. I noticed with a sinking feeling that he was holding his smartphone up, camera pointed directly at me. "Are you recording me?" I asked, still holding my pruning shears. "For our protection," Greg muttered, not meeting my eyes. "In case you get unbalanced." The irony might have made me laugh if it weren't so heartbreaking. They were treating me like a dangerous animal. This daughter who'd used me as an ATM for decades, and the son-in-law who'd never once thanked me for bailing him out of his numerous financial misadventures. "Have you lost your mind?" Amanda shouted, waving a crumpled copy of my will. Her manicured nails, the ones I'd paid for just last month, flashed red in the autumn sunlight. "You're giving everything to a bunch of homeless brats?" I set the pruning shears down carefully on the garden bench. "They're not homeless, Amanda, they're orphans. Children without parents or grandparents to love them." "Oh, spare me the saint act," she spat. "You're doing this to punish me. Admit it." I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm doing this because it's right. Because they need it more than you do." Amanda's face flushed deeper, the color spreading down her neck. "What about your grandchildren? What about Zach and Lily? You're going to leave them nothing, not even for their college? The same grandchildren who ignore me unless they need money for a new phone?" I asked quietly. "The ones who called me useless last Christmas and you laughed." She flinched slightly at that. A brief flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossing her face before the anger returned. "You're sick," she hissed. "You've always been sick, using guilt and money to control everyone around you." Greg stepped forward then, still filming. "Amanda's right, Richard. This behavior isn't normal. First the silent treatment, now disinheriting your only family. We're concerned about your mental state." I felt a cold dread spreading through my chest. I'd heard about this. Elderly parents whose children declared them incompetent to gain control of their finances. But I never thought my own daughter would stoop so low. "I'm perfectly sound of mind," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fear gripping my heart. "I've simply decided to leave my money to those who need it most." "Not even for your granddaughter? For Lily?" Amanda's voice broke, but her eyes remained dry. It was the same performance she'd given countless times when trying to extract money from me. Tears without moisture, emotion without feeling. I looked directly into her eyes, searching for any glimpse of the little girl who once sat on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. All I saw was calculation. "The last time I saw Lily," I said softly, "she called me useless. And you thought it was funny." Amanda's face hardened. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," she said coldly. "We're going to have you evaluated for dementia. No sane person would throw away their family like this." As they stormed back to their car, I sank onto the garden bench, suddenly exhausted. The roses Sarah had planted seemed to bend toward me in the gentle breeze, as if offering comfort. 2 days later, a formal legal notice arrived, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who couldn't meet my eyes. Amanda was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent and to appoint her as guardian of my estate. I called Megan immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. When she answered, I found I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. "Mr. Michaels, Richard, are you okay?" Her voice was warm with concern. "My daughter," I managed finally. "She's trying to take everything. She wants to declare me incompetent." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Megan spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more determined. "Come to St. Mary's tomorrow morning. I know a lawyer who specializes in elder rights." "And Richard?" "Yes? Bring that letter from your wife, the one you told me about. We might need it." I agreed, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. And then Megan told me something that left me silent for long minutes. "Emery was born deaf, and no one cared about that until you came along." In that moment, I began to understand that perhaps life was giving me a second chance, not just to be loved, but to protect someone who truly needed me. Legal proceedings move with glacial slowness except when they don't. In my case, Amanda's petition for guardianship seemed to fly through the system with unnatural speed. Perhaps it was the urgent medical concerns her lawyer cited, or maybe, and this thought kept me awake at night, she had connections I didn't know about. Either way, less than 3 weeks after receiving that first legal notice, I found myself sitting in a sterile courthouse hallway, waiting to be judged. The bench beneath me was hard and unforgiving, much like the justice I feared awaited me. My suit, the same one I'd worn to Sarah's funeral, hung looser now. I'd lost weight in the past month, my appetite vanishing under the stress of fighting my own child for the right to control my life. "Mr. Michaels?" A young woman in a crisp pantsuit approached. "I'm Bethany Wilson, Ms. Harper's assistant." Ms. Harper was the attorney Megan had connected me with, a no-nonsense woman with salt and pepper hair and the determined eyes of someone who'd seen every dirty trick the system could play. "Ms. Harper asked me to tell you she's running a few minutes late. Last-minute discovery." Bethany's voice dropped. "The opposition just submitted a new witness." My stomach clenched. "Who?" "Dr. Lawrence Friedman, your primary care physician for..." She consulted her tablet. 27 years. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Larry Friedman had been more than my doctor. He'd been my friend. He'd treated Sarah through her cancer, held my hand figuratively through my own health scares, played golf with me on Saturdays. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. He can't testify against me, I whispered, more to myself than to Bethany. He knows I'm of sound mind. Bethany's expression was gentle but not pitying, a small mercy. Let's wait for Ms. Harper before we jump to conclusions. But in my heart I already knew. If Amanda had gotten to Larry, what chance did I stand? He knew every medication I'd ever taken, every moment of grief-induced depression after Sarah's death, every anxiety attack during Amanda's rebellious teen years. In his hands, my normal human struggles could be twisted into evidence of instability. The courtroom doors opened, and a stream of people exited from the previous case. Among them, I spotted Amanda and Greg, their heads bent close together in conversation with a slick-looking man who could only be their attorney. Amanda was dressed conservatively in a high-necked blouse and pencil skirt, the perfect picture of a concerned daughter. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup subtle. She'd even removed most of her jewelry. The performance was beginning. She glanced up and saw me watching. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something almost like regret, before her expression hardened again. She whispered something to Greg, who nodded without looking in my direction. Ms. Harper arrived moments later, striding down the hallway with purpose, her practical heels clicking against the marble floor. Unlike Amanda's attorney with his designer suit and gleaming watch, Eleanor Harper dressed for battle, not show. Her simple navy suit and minimal jewelry spoke of someone who wanted the court to focus on her words, not her appearance. "Richard," she said, grasping my hand firmly, "I hear they've added your doctor to their witness list." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Let me guess. He's about to testify that you've been showing signs of cognitive decline? Perhaps mentioning that grief can accelerate dementia? How did you—" "Because I've seen this playbook before," her mouth said in a grim line. "It's despicable but effective. Family members who want control of an elder's assets often go after the person's doctor, sometimes with bribes, sometimes with threats of malpractice suits for missing the signs of dementia." My hands began to shake. I clasped them tightly in my lap, trying to steady myself. "What do? We fight," Ms. Harper said simply. "And we have something they don't expect." From her briefcase, she withdrew a sealed envelope, the one containing Sarah's letter. "This letter from your late wife, predicting exactly this kind of behavior from your daughter? It's powerful evidence of a long-standing pattern, not a sudden mental decline." Before I could respond, the bailiff appeared at the courtroom door, calling my case number. It was time. The hearing passed in a blur of legal terminology and pointed questions. Amanda's attorney painted me as a deteriorating old man, consumed by bitterness and paranoia. Dr. Friedman testified that he had concerns about my mental state, citing my fixation on helping orphaned children as possibly indicative of displaced grief and cognitive decline. When my own doctor of nearly 3 decades looked me in the eye and suggested I was losing my mind, something broke inside me. Not in a dramatic way. There were no tears, no outbursts. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life falling apart. My daughter took the stand next, her voice breaking at all the right moments as she described my erratic behavior and concerning decisions. The rehearsed nature of her testimony was obvious to me, but would the judge see through it? "He's always been difficult," Amanda said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "But this is different. He's giving away his life savings to strangers. He spends hours at a children's home telling the kids he's their grandfather. It's not healthy, it's not him." The judge, a stern-faced woman with piercing eyes, watched Amanda carefully, her expression unreadable. "And what about the events of Father's Day?" Ms. Harper asked during cross-examination. "Could you describe what happened that day?" Amanda shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a family dinner. Dad got upset over nothing and left early. He's always been sensitive. So you deny saying, and I quote, 'You're nothing but a wallet to me, I've never loved you?'" A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's face flushed deep red. That's taken out of context. We were discussing college funds for my children, and—" "Yes or no, Ms. Stevens? Did you say those words to your father on Father's Day in front of your entire family and several guests?" Amanda looked at her hands. "Yes, but no further questions." Ms. Harper said crisply. By the time I took the stand myself, I felt hollowed out, a ghost in my own life. My own child wanted me declared incompetent. My doctor of nearly 30 years had betrayed me. The system designed to protect vulnerable elders was being weaponized against me. Yet amid this crushing despair, an unexpected light appeared. As I left the courthouse that day, the judge having decided to take the weekend to consider her ruling, I found Megan waiting by my car, holding a large envelope. "Emery made this for you," she said softly, handing it to me. Inside was a letter with drawings. Unable to write long sentences, Emery had drawn herself holding my hand, with the word Grandpa in Braille glued on top. I cried as I hadn't since I buried Sarah. In that moment I understood. If I had lost a daughter, I had gained something even greater. Someone who saw me completely. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue November sky. Its red brick exterior and white columns reminiscent of a time when justice might have been simpler, if not always fair. I arrived early that Monday morning, parking my old Buick in the nearly empty lot and sitting there for several long minutes, gathering my courage like a man about to face a firing squad. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a face I barely recognized, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, new lines carved around my mouth, hair that seemed to have whitened overnight. The past 3 weeks had aged me more than the previous decade. "You can do this, old man," I whispered to myself, a habit I'd developed since Sarah's death. Sometimes talking to myself was the only way to hear a kind word. Ms. Harper met me at the courthouse steps, her briefcase clutched firmly in one hand, a thermos of coffee in the other. She offered me a small, encouraging smile. "How are you holding up, Richard?" "I'm here," I replied, which was the most honest answer I could give. I wasn't good, I wasn't even okay, but I was present, still fighting. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Amanda and Greg sat at the front with their attorney, whose name I'd learned was Bradford Whiting III, the kind of name that practically came with a silver spoon attached. Behind them sat my grandson Zach, looking uncomfortable in a tie that was slightly too tight, and my granddaughter Lily, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. They hadn't spoken to me directly in over a year, and seeing them there, reluctant props in their mother's performance, broke my heart all over again. What surprised me was the row of unfamiliar faces behind my table. Megan from St. Mary's, 3 other staff members I recognized from my visits, and even my next-door neighbor Ernest, who'd been bringing in my mail and newspaper while I was caught up in this legal nightmare. A small army of supporters I hadn't known I had. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Henrietta Waters entered, her black robes flowing around her as she took her seat. Her expression gave nothing away as she shuffled through the papers before her. "Before I deliver my ruling on the petition for guardianship," she began, her voice firm and measured, "I'd like to hear the full content of the will in question. Mr. Whiting, you've made much of Mr. Michaels's decision to change his will as evidence of diminished capacity. I believe the court should hear exactly what changes were made." Bradford Whiting III rose smoothly to his feet. "Your Honor, the specific bequests are less relevant than the pattern of behavior." "I disagree," Judge Waters interrupted, fixing him with a stern look. "The content of the will speaks directly to Mr. Michaels's state of mind. Ms. Harper, would you please read the relevant sections?" Ms. Harper stood, retrieving a document from her briefcase. "Certainly, Your Honor. The will is quite straightforward. After the standard provisions for funeral expenses and payment of debts, Mr. Michaels has directed that his entire estate, with the exception of a few personal items, be donated to St. Mary's Children's Home. His stated reason, and I quote, is, 'I choose to donate my inheritance to those who called me Grandpa, without expecting anything in return.'" A murmur ran through the courtroom. I risked a glance at Amanda, who had gone completely still, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "There is one additional document that Mr. Michaels has asked to be included with his will," Ms. Harper continued. "A letter written by his late wife, Sarah Michaels, shortly before her death 25 years ago. Mr. Michaels has kept this letter private until now, but feels its contents are relevant to these proceedings." Judge Waters leaned forward slightly. "And this letter was written when?" "May 17, 1999, Your Honor. 3 weeks before Mrs. Michaels passed away from ovarian cancer." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Ms. Harper unfolded the letter, Sarah's letter, her hands treating the worn paper with reverence. The sight of it, displayed so publicly after being my private comfort for so many years, made my throat tighten with emotion. "My dearest Richard," Ms. Harper began reading, her clear voice carrying throughout the now silent courtroom. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. There are things I need to tell you about our daughter, things I've observed that you, in your endless optimism and love, might have missed." I couldn't look at Amanda as the letter continued, detailing Sarah's concerns about our daughter's patterns of manipulation and entitlement. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Ms. Harper read Sarah's prediction. "If one day she forgets who you are, or treats you as if you never existed, remember what you promised me. Remember that you were everything she had, and that is enough. Your love was always enough, Richard, even when she couldn't see it. But love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those who take advantage is to stop enabling them." The silence that followed was so dense that no one coughed or shifted in their seats. For the first time, I risked looking directly at Amanda. Her face had drained of all color, her eyes wide with shock. For a brief moment she looked like a lost child rather than the calculated adult who had dragged me into court. Judge Waters broke the silence. "Ms. Stevens, did you know about this letter?" Amanda seemed unable to speak for a moment. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. "No, Your Honor, I never knew my mother felt that way." "Mr. Michaels," the judge turned to me, her gaze direct but not unkind. "Why did you keep this letter from your daughter all these years?" I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that every eye in the room was on me. "Because it would have hurt her, Your Honor, and because I kept hoping she would prove her mother wrong." Another murmur rippled through the courtroom, louder this time. Amanda stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps she was. Perhaps we had been strangers to each other for a very long time. Judge Waters called for order, then spent several minutes reviewing her notes. When she looked up, her decision was written clearly on her face. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, I find no basis for declaring Richard Michaels incompetent or in need of guardianship. The petition is denied." Relief flooded through me so intensely that I had to grip the table to remain upright. But Judge Waters wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "I find the timing and nature of this petition troubling. It appears to be less about Mr. Michaels' welfare and more about controlling his financial decisions. Ms. Stevens," she fixed Amanda with a stern look, "the court takes a very dim view of using guardianship proceedings as a means to circumvent a parent's legitimate estate planning wishes." Amanda's face flushed deep red. Whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Beside her, Greg stared resolutely at the floor. As we left the courtroom, Amanda caught up to me in the hallway, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. "Dad," she called, her voice strained. For the first time in years, she looked genuinely shaken. "Did Mom really write that about me?" I nodded slowly. "She loved you, Amanda. She just saw things clearly. And you've kept it all this time? Just waiting to use it against me?" Even now, she couldn't see beyond herself. "No," I said quietly. "I kept it because it was all I had left of her. I never wanted to use it at all. Victory tastes different when you've won against your own child. There is no sweetness to it, no triumph, just a hollow ache where celebration should be." As I walked down the courthouse steps that afternoon, the November sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, I felt every one of my 73 years. Ms. Harper walked beside me, her briefcase swinging lightly at her side. Unlike me, she carried the lightness of a professional battle well fought. This wasn't personal for her, it was justice served. "We should discuss next steps," she said as we reached the bottom of the stairs. "With the guardianship petition dismissed, you're fully protected legally. But there might be other avenues your daughter could pursue." I nodded absently, my eyes scanning the parking lot. Among the scattered vehicles, I spotted Megan's faded blue minivan. She was leaning against it, her arms crossed against the chill, but she wasn't alone. Beside her, bundled in a puffy purple coat that made her look like a tiny grape, stood Emery. My heart skipped a beat. "They came," I whispered, more to myself than to Miss Harper. She followed my gaze and smiled. "Of course they did. You've made quite an impression at St. Mary's, Mr. Michaels." I barely heard her. My feet were already moving, carrying me across the asphalt with more energy than I'd felt in weeks. As I approached, Emery spotted me. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and she broke away from Megan, running toward me with arms outstretched. I knelt down, ignoring the protest of my arthritic knees, and opened my arms. She crashed into me with the full-body enthusiasm only a child can muster, nearly knocking me backward. I steadied myself with one hand on the ground, the other wrapped tightly around her small frame. The force of her embrace, so genuine, so uncomplicated, broke something loose inside me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in the courtroom now flowed freely, soaking into the shoulder of her purple coat. She didn't pull away or look embarrassed by my emotion. Instead, she just held on tighter, as if trying to squeeze all the sadness out of me. When she finally pulled back, her small hands came up to my face, her fingertips gently touching my wet cheeks. She tilted her head questioningly, her dark eyes full of concern. Megan had approached and now stood beside us. "She's asking why you're crying," she translated. "If we're happy we won, why are you sad?" I caught Emery's hands in mine, marveling at how tiny they were, how perfectly they fit within my weathered palms. "I'm not sad," I said, making sure to face her directly so she could read my lips. "Sometimes people cry when they're very, very happy." Megan signed this to her, and Emery's brow furrowed in concentration as she processed this paradox. Then she nodded sagely, as if filing away this piece of adult complexity for future reference. "How did she know?" I asked Megan, rising slowly to my feet. "About the court date, I mean." Megan smiled. "She's been asking about you every day. When I explained you were fighting to keep your home and your choices, she insisted on being here. She said," Megan's voice caught slightly, "she said her grandpa shouldn't have to fight alone." The lump in my throat grew larger. Grandpa. Such a simple word, but one that had been hollow for so long. My own grandchildren called me Richard, when Amanda wasn't around to remind them to say grandpa in that rehearsed, dutiful way. But this child, this stranger who owed me nothing, had claimed me as her own. Emery tugged at my coat sleeve, signing something rapid and enthusiastic. "She wants to know if we're still going for ice cream," Megan translated with a laugh. I might have promised her a celebration. For the first time in what felt like years, I laughed. A real laugh that came from deep in my chest. Ice cream in November? Absolutely. As we walked toward the minivan, Ms. Harper called after me. "Richard, we still need to discuss those next steps." I turned back, Emery's hand firmly clasped in mine. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I have a very important ice cream date." Ms. Harper's professional facade cracked into a warm smile. "Of course. Enjoy your victory, Mr. Michaels. You've earned it." We drove to Callahan's, an old-fashioned ice cream parlor that had somehow survived the onslaught of trendy frozen yogurt shops and chain cafes. The place hadn't changed since I'd brought Amanda there as a little girl. The same red vinyl booths, the same jukebox in the corner, even the same faded photographs of local landmarks on the walls. Emery pressed her face against the glass display, her breath fogging the surface as she contemplated the rainbow of flavors before her. The teenage server waited patiently, not rushing her despite the small line forming behind us. Finally, she pointed decisively at the mint chocolate chip. I ordered a single scoop of vanilla for myself. Some habits never change, and we settled into a booth by the window. As Emery attacked her ice cream with the single-minded focus of a child on a mission, I found myself studying her face. There was something in the determined set of her jaw, the thoughtful furrow of her brow when she concentrated, that reminded me of Sarah. Not in her features. Emery's warm brown skin and tightly curled hair were nothing like my late wife's fair complexion and straight blonde locks, but in her spirit, that same quiet determination, that same depth behind her eyes. "Why are we happy, Grandpa?" she asked suddenly, her hands forming the signs while Megan translated her words. A drop of green ice cream had escaped to her chin, and I gently wiped it away with a napkin. "Because the judge said I can keep making my own choices," I answered, making sure to face her directly. "And I choose to spend time with you." She considered this seriously, nodding as Megan signed my response. Then she set down her spoon and signed something else, her small hands moving with careful precision. Megan's eyes widened slightly before she translated. She says, "Did your daughter stop loving you because I started?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. I struggled to find an answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old, that would make sense to anyone. "No, sweetheart," I said finally. "My daughter stopped loving me long before you were born. Or maybe she never really started. Some people find it very hard to love others." Emery absorbed this, her expression solemn beyond her years. Then she signed again. "She says she's not sorry," Megan translated, her voice soft. Because if your daughter had loved you, you might never have come to St. Mary's, and then she wouldn't have found her grandpa. In that moment, sitting in a worn vinyl booth with melting ice cream between us, I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental. The pain of Amanda's rejection was still there, a wound that might never fully heal, but alongside it now was something new, a sense of purpose, of belonging, of being truly seen. "Tell her," I said to Megan, my voice thick with emotion, "that I'm not sorry either, because today I gained a granddaughter." Emery's smile, when Megan signed this to her, was bright enough to light up the darkest winter night. 5 years can pass in the blink of an eye when you're truly living. That's what I've learned since that day in the courthouse, since I chose to redefine what family means to me. The calendar on my kitchen wall now marks my 78th birthday, a milestone I wasn't sure I'd reach. My hair has thinned to wisps of silver, and my hands shake more than they used to. But there's a lightness in my step that wasn't there 5 years ago. The legal process to become Emery's guardian wasn't easy. There were home studies and background checks, interviews with social workers and child psychologists. At my age, adopting wasn't an option, but legal guardianship was. Megan supported me every step of the way, testifying to the bond Emery and I had formed, explaining how the girl blossomed in my presence. "She's different with you," Megan told the family court judge during one hearing. "More confident, more engaged. She started learning to read since Mr. Michaels began bringing her books." The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair and kind eyes, had studied me carefully over the rim of her reading glasses. "Mr. Michaels, at your age, taking on the care of a special needs child is a significant commitment. Are you prepared for the challenges?" I'd straightened my shoulders, meeting her gaze directly. "Your Honor, I've had a life full of regrets, things I should have done differently with my own daughter, ways I failed as a father. But this child, this remarkable little girl, has given me a second chance. I don't intend to waste it." In the end, the court granted me guardianship with certain conditions. Emery would continue living at St. Mary's during the week, where she had access to specialized education and support services, but she would spend weekends and holidays with me. It was a compromise that honored both her needs and my limitations. The day I brought her home for our first official weekend together, I'd transformed the spare bedroom that had once been Amanda's into a space fit for a princess. The walls, once a forgettable beige, now glowed a soft lavender, Emery's favorite color. A bookshelf overflowed with picture books and early readers, and a small desk sat beneath the window, equipped with art supplies and a child-sized lamp. Emery had stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder, before launching herself at me in what had become her signature greeting, a full-body hug that nearly knocked me off my feet. "Is it really mine?" she'd signed, her hands moving so excitedly that Megan had to ask her to slow down for translation. "All yours," I'd confirmed, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "For whenever you stay with Grandpa." Over the years, our weekend routine became sacred. Friday afternoons, I'd pick her up from St. Mary's, and we'd stop for ice cream on the way home, regardless of the weather. Saturdays were for adventures, the zoo, the science museum, the botanical gardens. Sundays were quieter, church in the morning, where I'd learned the sign language for all the hymns, followed by a lazy afternoon of reading or working in the garden together. Emery grew like a weed, shooting up 3 inches in the past year alone. At 13, she was all gangly limbs and boundless energy, her childhood roundness giving way to the first hints of adolescence. But her smile, that infectious, uninhibited joy, remained unchanged. Today is a special day, not just because it's my birthday, but because it marks 5 years since the court case that changed everything. 5 years since I closed my wallet to those who saw me as nothing more than a source of funds, and opened my heart to a child who saw me as her grandfather. Amanda hasn't spoken to me since that day in the courthouse. I hear about her occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She and Greg bought a vacation home in Florida. Zach dropped out of college to find himself. Lily is engaged to a boy I've never met. These facts wash over me like news about distant strangers, stirring only the faintest ripple of emotion. I sent cards on their birthdays for the first 2 years. Olive branches extended across the chasm of hurt between us. They were returned unopened. After that, I stopped trying. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Emery bounds into the kitchen now, interrupting my reflections. Her hair is pulled back in dozens of tiny braids, each tipped with purple beads that click softly as she moves. In her hands, she carries a flat rectangular package wrapped in newspaper and tied with yarn, her standard wrapping technique. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," she signs, her hands flying through the familiar gestures before she sets the package on the table. "Thank you, sweetheart," I reply, my own signing still clumsy but functional after years of practice. She watches expectantly as I unwrap her gift, her eyes bright with excitement. Beneath the newspaper is a picture frame, clearly handmade in her art class at school. But it's what's inside the frame that steals my breath away. Sarah's letter, the one that had saved me in court 5 years ago, carefully preserved behind glass. The yellowed paper with my wife's elegant handwriting is now framed, with the final paragraph highlighted in soft gold ink. "If you have to give up on someone to save another, do it. Love is also about choosing where to sow again." And beneath those words, in Emery's slightly crooked but determined handwriting, she has added, "Thank you for giving up on my mother, so you could save me." I look up at her, confused. "Your mother?" I ask, my hands forming the question. Emery nods solemnly. "Megan told me," she signs. "Amanda is my biological mother's cousin. That's how Megan knew to call you when I needed someone. She knew we were already family, even if Amanda didn't want me." The room seems to tilt around me as the pieces fall into place. The coincidence that never was. The strange familiarity I'd felt upon first seeing Emery. The way she sometimes tilted her head exactly like Sarah used to. "You knew?" I managed to sign, my hands shaking. "All this time?" She shakes her head. "Megan told me last month for my birthday. She said 13 is old enough to know where you come from." Her hands pause, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Are you mad?" I pull her into my arms, holding her close as tears stream down my face. "Not mad," I whisper against her hair, knowing she can feel the vibration of my voice even if she can't hear the words. "Never mad." And when I release her, I make sure she can see my face clearly as I sign, "You are the best birthday gift I've ever received. Not just today, but every day since you came into my life." Her smile, so like Sarah's in that moment, warms me from the inside out. There's a perfect symmetry to it all, a sense of things coming full circle. What I lost in Amanda, I found again in Emery. Not a replacement, but a redemption. That night, as I tuck Emery into bed in her lavender room, I think about Sarah's final words in that letter, about giving up on someone to save another, about choosing where to sow love again. I close my eyes that night knowing that, even without forgiveness from my daughter, I've found redemption where I least expected it. Not in blood, but in love. The kind that sees beyond biology, beyond obligation, to the heart of what family truly means. Sometimes the family we choose gives us more love than the family we're born into. I often wonder what Sarah would think if she could see Emery and me now. Would she smile knowing her last words guided me to find joy again? When your own child looks you in the eyes and says you're nothing but a wallet, would you have the strength to close that wallet forever and open your heart elsewhere? Life has taught me that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about letting go and finding new places to plant your love. The greatest lesson I've learned in my 78 years is that blood doesn't make a family. Recognition does. Recognizing someone's humanity, their worth beyond what they can give you. My daughter never saw me, but Emery did, with eyes full of love and hands that signed Grandpa before she even knew my name. If this story touched your heart, please follow this channel for more stories of redemption and unexpected second chances. Like and share if you believe in the power of chosen family, and comment below if you've ever found love and belonging in unexpected places. Remember, it's never too late to close one chapter and begin another, even when your hands are shaking and your heart is broken.